to 2000, so that was about the time I taught that class, my first Sunday school class. So, but I found 4 or 5 that look interesting. One on Daniel and some other things. So I may use some of those curriculums on Sunday morning, maybe see how it goes. And then if I have a curriculum like that, then if somebody needs to fill in or whatnot, we will have that available. But Proverbs 26, most of the verses in this chapter are one-line sayings, and kind of until you get to the very end of the chapter. But they all seem to have, it's not like they're just one-line sayings without rhyme or reason. They all are about fools. How to identify fools, how to react or treat fools. So really it's an organized lesson on fools. So Proverbs 26 verse 1, as snow in summer and rain in harvest, so honor is not fitting for a fool. Solomon is teaching us that fools do not deserve honor, reward, or commendation, which is sometimes difficult for the world to do, because they commendate everybody. They want to reward everybody. And Solomon sings no. And this is also ironic, because who tends to get rewarded the most in this world?
The worst.
Yeah, the fools. They have massive award ceremonies for all these Hollywood actors and actresses, and they praise them, and they get rewarded. Meanwhile, the followers of Christ don't get rewarded by the world. Of course, we know we'll be rewarded in heaven, because that's our goal, is laying up treasures in heaven. So fools should not be rewarded, but that's what the world does. Verse 2, like a flitting sparrow, like a flying swallow, so a curse without cause shall not alight. Solomon is saying that it doesn't make sense to wish someone harm or to try to hurt them when they've been good, when they are undeserving of the harm, because doing right will lead to blessings from God. So the verse is sort of telling us that you shouldn't be doing this, because if they're doing right, what do we know is going to happen? God's going to bless them. So it's like, bumping up against something that's not going to work. Verse 3, Proverbs 26, a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for the fool's back. People who continue to act like a fool will find themselves in trouble. This is a poetic, fancy way of saying fools are a glutton for punishment. Have you ever met anybody like that? They just continue to are you kidding me? You got to get a whip for the donkey, a bridle for a whip for the horse, a bridle for the donkey, and a rod for a fool's back. So the way around that punishment, unfortunately, a fool's often going to have to they're going to have to listen to that instruction, but they don't. They reject it. They continue in their foolishness. Have you ever seen a kid who needed to be spanked? Right? So we know that, right? Children are children. They're immature. They're foolish. They do bad things. So they need to be spanked. But have you ever met a grown adult?
Obviously, was not spanked as a child.
That's the issue? Yeah. A rod for the fool's back. And every now and again, I'm sure you meet lots at the school. Yeah. Every now and again, you get to thinking about a situation, maybe with one of the students that I'm talking to, and you think, boy, taking them out back and whooping on them, I'll probably teach them a lesson, but I don't think I could get away with that. right? So, verse 3, a rod for the fool's back. Verse 4 and 5, these two kind of go together. Do not answer a fool according to his folly, lest you also be like him. Answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own eyes. These two verses back to back has caused confusion over the years. Some people will look at these two particular verses and they will say, look, the Bible's contradictory. Here's my proof. But I don't take it that way at all, because I think this is a case of knowing what to do at that particular time. Because typically, it's not worth arguing with the fool. I think that's a generality that's being presented there in verse 4. Don't bother arguing with a fool. I mean, that's like arguing with a 4-year-old. I remember I was talking to a young kid here. This is a couple years ago. And after I was done, it just nothing was accomplished. The child just kept saying the same thing over and over again. And Connie Barnes said to me, haven't you ever heard, don't argue with a 4-year-old? I'm like, I've never heard that, but that's very smart. That's very smart. So, or like arguing with a drunk guy. Yeah, you talk to a drunk guy and it's like, what in the world? They don't make any sense. So, typically, no matter what you say, you'll never be right. So you will end up looking like a fool to continue on in that discussion. So generally speaking, we don't bother conversing with fools because we know how it's going to end. But verse 5 indicates sometimes a fool does need to be called out. Sometimes they do need to be corrected. Generally speaking, it's not wise to do that, to be drawn into a foolish debate. However, as followers of Christ, we do know the only hope that people have is to be told the truth, right? So we tell people the truth about the gospel, especially about how Jesus can save them, but we can tell people the truth. I got into a discussion with a young man on the way to the all-nighter, and we were talking, and he was telling me about his future plans and whatnot. And I started laying those truth bombs on him. Maybe nobody else had said these. I'm like, that's a fine plan, but here's a thought, a suggestion that I would have this all lined up beforehand. And he was behind me, so I couldn't see his face. But I kind of wondered if he was like stunned or rolling his eyes or what, right? But sometimes people do need to hear the truth. So I don't have a problem with these two verses back to back. I don't think they're contradictory. I think it's just a case of knowing when to speak and when to shut your mouth. So does anybody else have any thoughts? Have you ever heard anything, these discussion on Proverbs 26, 4 and 5?
I think we've all been in those kinds of situations. Mm-hmm. And how I deal with it is that I just tell them what I think and I walk away. I'm not going to listen to their rhetoric.
Right.
So that's it. It's just cut and dry. I don't sit and argue.
Right. Christine, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, there's times to just walk away from it and almost kind of shake your head like, you are an idiot. Mm-hmm. You know, like in using the word fool, some people are offended about, biblically, sometimes people are just a fool. Mm-hmm. But then sometimes if they just, when they continuously want to just run their mouth, that is just, it goes back, in Proverbs it says, foolishness is bound in the heart of the child. And it's our, and then it says about the correction of God far from it. It is our job as parents our children are automatically going to be foolish. Mm-hmm. It is what it is. And it's our job to correct that foolishness. And then sometimes you meet, and so sometimes it's answering your kid like, that is foolish. That is absolutely 100% foolish. Be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and then sometimes it is the reason that is foolish, and this is why. It's knowing that boundary of when just call a fool, and sometimes they do need instruction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, yeah, once again, we don't have a contradiction here, so I appreciate the discussion. Verse 6, he who sends a message by the hand of a fool cuts off his own feet and drinks violence. Trusting a fool to deliver an important message is a bad idea. I think the meaning of that particular verse, poetic, yes, but I think it's very clear. A fool doesn't care about honesty, right? The accuracy of the message, telling the truth. A fool doesn't care about loyalty, like I've been depended on to do this, and I'm going to do it no matter what. They don't care about communicating the message that they were tasked to deliver. Another additional thought is a fool may not even remember what the message was. So typically, you know, I've learned over the years that I can forget things. So text me or put it in writing, and that way I can deliver that message correctly. So verse 7, like the legs of the lame that hang limp is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. This verse is very similar to verse 9, which we will see in a moment. Fools might be able to quote a verse. Ever met somebody that you would look at them and you would think, there's no way this person goes to church? And then you start talking with them and they start quoting all these verses, and you're like, wow, you know a lot of the Bible. Why are you a homeless alcoholic? Like, you know the truth, but you don't do it. Sometimes I've met people that just quote verse after verse. Now, most of the time it's partial quotes or it's convoluted where they put things together incorrectly or even misquoted. But you just think in your head, obviously you're not following the Word of God. Obviously you're not, putting it to practice. You've heard the truth, but you're not doing it. So all that is evidence is that they are hardened. Their hearts are hardened, and they will not listen to that advice that they're, quoting. So we have to think about that particular saying. Verse 8, like one who binds a stone in a sling is he who gives honor to a fool. Now, does anybody here want to take a guess what that verse is talking about? This one was kind of tough for me. I had to get out another commentary to try to find the meaning. Anybody want to take a guess?
Say the verse again.
Verse 8. Like one who binds a stone in a sling is he who gives honor to a fool.
Are we talking about like a slingshot?
No, it's actually not a slingshot. So that's what I initially thought. Okay, you got it. That's exactly it. So this word for sling is apparently the only place in the entire Bible that this particular word is used. And it is referring to a sling. You know how in the old cartoons of the hobo, they have a stick and they tie up their handkerchief and they have their stuff in it and they're carrying it kind of on a sling on a stick. That is what's in mind. So it's like, it'd be really foolish to put a stone in that sling. Like really useless. So maybe a modern way of looking at this would be like, hey, I'm going to go out on a hike with my backpack. What's in your backpack? Some stones. Okay? Not very smart. Now I know sometimes occasionally people will put weights or stones in a backpack to train they want a certain amount of weight and they'll train for that. That's done on purpose. But Solomon is saying, why in the world would you have a sling with a stone in it? I kind of found that interesting as I had to dig a little bit deep to get that. Honoring a fool is like carrying a stone in your backpack. Okay, just not smart. So verse 9. Like a thorn that goes into the hand of a drunkard is a proverb in the mouth of a fool. So this is talking about a drunk guy. He doesn't really know what's going on. He gets this thorn stuck in his finger. It's just like he's going to cause himself more damage or others damage. So a fool will do that as well with a proverb. Speaking a verse, he will misapply the proverb. He's going to cause damage that way. He maybe would take it out of context. Or more than likely, he will use that verse, that particular proverb, to manipulate others. Now, this morning we are in Romans chapter 1, the last little bit of the chapter, and it's a lot about the LGBTQ agenda. I watched some videos when I've been driving here and there. I typed in on YouTube, what does Jesus say about homosexuality? And the reason why I wanted to hear what other people had to say is because there is some well-known preachers that say Jesus doesn't talk about homosexuality. And they say, they even have like very dramatic videos or very dramatic, and it says, here's what Jesus says about homosexuality, and then they have a blank. So I kind of wanted to look at that. So some people even very abusively misquote and misuse the scriptures. This one that's kind of gained traction is this Catholic priest, and he goes back to the Old Testament, and he says, Jesus doesn't talk about homosexuality, it's the Old Testament. And he says, well, look what else the Old Testament talks about. It talks about not wearing clothes made out of different fabrics, and people start laughing in the audience, and he's sort of mocking these Old Testament laws. But what did Jesus use when he was on this earth as his text, when he was preaching? He used the Old Testament. That's all he had, right? When Jesus was asked about marriage, what text did he preach from? Genesis chapter 1, right? And he didn't talk about homosexuality and explicitly condemn it. Instead, he taught from a positive point of view, right? He was asked about marriage, so he didn't say, hey, wait, I want to take this time to, condemn homosexuality. Homosexuality was not a widespread thing in the nation of Israel. In foreign lands around Israel, right, in the Gentile areas, it was more of a problem. By the way, who was Romans written to? Their primary audience was Gentile Romans, where homosexuality was a problem. So what was addressed in the very first chapter, right? Homosexuality. But what did Jesus do? He taught from a positive point of view. So you can teach people from the negative, or you can teach people from the positive. Jesus said, hey, what God came up with at the very beginning was one man leaves his father and mother and joins with one woman. That's the ideal thing. That's what's natural. That's what's right. So I would argue that Jesus did not, he did not talk about it, right? He did talk about it but from a positive point of view. So fools will misquote verses, misuse verses to prove their point, and actually this man's argument actually it actually does the opposite. It actually proves the point, because that's exactly what Jesus did, was use the Old Testament, not to mock what he was teaching. He did it to prove his point. So verse 7, verse 9 sort of go together. Don't misuse the word of God. Verse 10, the great God who formed everything gives the fool his hire and the transgressor his wage. So those who trust a fool will eventually regret because they've caused irreparable harm. Fools really cannot be tasked with responsibility. Don't just hire anybody. Now, maybe I have a different translation. Maybe you have a little bit different translation. The verse maybe can be taken a different way because one of the other versions talks about don't just hire anybody, especially a fool. But I did see a funny video. It was a younger guy comes up, and it's hiring a plumber laborer. And the older guy says, we do have one test that you have to pass. And the young man's like, oh, okay, what is it? And he puts out a stethoscope, and he's listening to his heartbeat. And the older guy says, yep, you're hired. You have a heartbeat, you're hired. And so, maybe there's some particular situations where you can do that, but you got to be very careful typically who you hire. And, I was going to make a comment. This world has something today called DEI. You know what that is, Tony? What's that stand for? Right. Is that just kind of a repackaging or rebranding of affirmative action?
Possibly. In a magnified way.
Yeah. So, common sense, right, is to hire people that have ability, or at least hire somebody that has potential, right? As followers of Christ, color, nationality has nothing to do with who we hire, right? It's all about ability. And so, verse 11, as a dog returns to his own vomit, so a fool repeats his folly. I think I remember the first time I saw a dog returning to his own vomit, and I thought, that's disgusting. It can be gross watching a fool continue to do the same thing over and over and over and over again. Now, sometimes pastors get asked for counsel. They want advice, they want to get counsel, and I will make a suggestion. Sometimes it's a very, very common sense suggestion. I remember speaking with somebody one time, and their house was quite cluttered, and to the point where they didn't even have a spot to sleep on their bed. And I said, well, I think you would do a lot better if you would just clean up your house a little bit so you have a proper place to sleep. Oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. And then you go back or talk to them months and months later. I still haven't got that figured out yet. I still haven't done that. I just haven't had time. I'm like, you haven't had time just to clear a spot to sleep? Like you kind of just get to the point where you're dealing with somebody with the same problem over and over, and they still haven't fixed the issue. They continuously repeat the folly. So Solomon is teaching us, telling us that fools don't learn. They keep doing the same thing over and over again, and it just gets to the point where it's as disgusting as a dog, going after its own vomit. So, verse 12. Do you see a man wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Now, this verse is interesting because up to this point, all of the verses have really gone hard after fools. But here it says, a prideful man is worse than a fool, which it's very true because pride does a lot of things. It prevents people from recognizing the truth. And most importantly, it causes people to reject Christ as they think, I'm good, I don't need that. So pride flaunts itself. Pride doesn't realize Christ is needed. And Solomon says a prideful person is worse than a foolish person, because at least throughout the book of Proverbs, at least there's a chance. There's at least a chance for a foolish person to learn, although it's very rare, right? We see in the book of Proverbs sometimes lazy people will discover the error of their ways and they will start working hard. Sometimes in the book of Proverbs, a drinker will eventually learn sometimes, and they'll change. So there's hope for these various foolish people, but for a prideful person, Solomon offers very little hope. Proverbs 26, verses 13 through 16. The lazy man says, there's a lion in the road, a fierce lion in the streets. As a door turns on its hinges, so does the lazy man on his bed. The lazy man buries his head in a bowl. It wearies him to bring it back to his mouth. The lazy man is wise in his own eyes, is wiser in his own eyes than 7 men who can answer sensibly. The lazy man always has an excuse, is kind of a way to paraphrase that section of verses. What might be an excuse of a lazy man? Any ideas?
Too tired.
Too tired. Yeah, too tired. What else? Didn't have time. Yeah. What else? It's too hot outside. Right? What might be the opposite excuse? It's too cold. Well, when is the weather ever going to be right? The particular hyperbole, I think this would be an example of a massive, incredible exaggeration, especially in today's world. Maybe back on Solomon's day it was a little bit different, but Solomon gives this hyperbole excuse of, there's a lion running amok in the streets. So this foolish person, the lion's going to get us. We can't go outside and do that work. So he lies in bed or he sits on the couch and does nothing productive. So Solomon says that this lazy man is offering no value to society. In fact, he's so lazy that he gets tired from eating. He then justifies behavior, thinks he's full of wisdom, and that last line there says he indicates that he's smarter than 7 men. Now, 7 is a biblical number of perfection, right? It's that round, perfect number. So it's not literally, hey, there's 7 people that I can name that I'm smarter than. He's indicating that I'm smarter than everyone else, right? That's the number of perfection. If I can say that I'm smarter than 7 people, that means I'm smarter than 7 or everybody else. So I'm so smart, I've got it all figured out, right? Verse 17. He who passes by and meddles in a quarrel not his own is like one who takes a dog by the ears. You know what I immediately thought of when I read that verse? Your dog. My dog.
I wouldn't want to take your dog by the ears.
Oh, I don't know if I picked them up by the ears, but I think I could tackle my dog, but there's some other bigger dogs you probably couldn't handle. Anybody want to guess what I thought of when I read this verse? You know me, guys. I thought of a John Wayne movie. The beginning of this John Wayne movie, you don't see him for the first scene when they kidnap his grandson, and they send off a rider to go find John Wayne. And it opens with him. He's looking down the barrel of his rifle, and he's like, I haven't messed with another man's coral in 40 years. And these guys got this sheep farmer kind of strung up on a rope, and then they knock this little boy over. He's like, oh, they got a mess and kicked the little boy. So he rides up, and he's like, I haven't messed with another man's dispute in years. And this other guy's like, well, you should just keep it that way right away. And John Wayne's like, nope, you had to go mess with that little boy. And generally speaking, right, Solomon is giving us some good advice. Of course, it's good to rescue somebody that's in danger, bail someone out, but make sure you're not going to cause yourself harm in the process, right? You get messing with somebody else's coral, it's like, grabbing a dog by the ears. It's just, generally speaking, it's not a good idea. So, verse 18. Like a madman who throws arrows and firebrands and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I was only joking. These two verses, I think, we all need to review from time to time. Because I think all of us are prone to mess with people, to antagonize people, to joke with people. And then, when we realize they're hurt, we say, hey, I was only joking. And sometimes the joke causes damage, and an apology doesn't work. Okay? So Solomon definitely puts this in perspective by saying, you're like a madman throwing firebrands and arrows, and he jumps from firebrands and arrows to death. It's like you're just throwing death. Is like one who says, and I almost fall off my chair. So I was only joking, right? So that's very dangerous. Verses 20 through 22. Where there is no wood, the fire goes out, and where there is no talebearer, strife ceases. As charcoal is to burning coals, and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are like tasty trifles, and they go down in the inmost body. Some people simply cannot help themselves. They have to be a whisperer. They have to gossip. And depending on your translation, it may not say talebearer, it may say whisperer, it may say gossiper. Now, I'm going to ask a question. Why may somebody whisper? Why may somebody backbite? Why may somebody gossip? What are reasons people gossip? Go ahead.
To make themselves feel better about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I think is the background for most of people that talk about other people, is because they want to think, well, I'm better than that because I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, that's my number one on the list. It makes themselves feel better about their own shortcomings. Yeah. Why else am I a person whisperer or gossip?
Taking pleasure in another person's misfortune.
Okay. Yeah. Kind of enjoy talking about somebody else's mistake. Yeah. What else?
You like to show off what you know.
Pardon me?
You like to show off what you know.
Oh, yeah. I don't even have that one. That's good. Like, ooh, I know all this stuff. Yeah. What else? That's why I wanted to ask this question, because I knew people would have good ideas.
Maybe to gain favor with somebody else.
Yeah. Putting somebody else down will elevate my own position.
Even then, maybe you can get a group of people all involved.
Yeah. What else? Why might somebody whisper or gossip or talebear is the older word? Any thoughts?
Out of spite.
Out of spite, yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a mechanism of control I have written down here. Is just another example, but clearly God does not like whispering. God does not like gossip. It's condemned all over Scripture. Now this extends from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Gossip, whispering, talebearing might seem like a minor sin really in the grand scheme of things. But we're going to look at Romans 1 this morning, and we're going to see that whispering, gossiping is in the same list of sins that homosexuality is included on. So it's also on that same list as violence, murder. So gossip, clearly to God, is an extremely destructive sin. Perhaps it doesn't get the same reaction, right? We start talking about LGBTQ, that's going to get a reaction out of others, but gossip is the same. So we need to think about that. You know, whispering, gossiping, talebearing. It's a very, very serious thing to God. So verse 23 through 27. Fervent lips with a wicked heart are like earthenware covered with silver dross. He who hates disguises it with his lips and lays up deceit within himself. When he speaks kind, they do not believe him, for there are 7 abominations in his heart. Though his hatred is covered by deceit, his wickedness will be revealed before the assembly. Whoever digs a pit will fall into it, and he who rolls a stone will have it roll back on them. The first part of that verse, verse 23, talks about people will come around us, and they will often look like solid silver, but underneath there is dirt. The silver is covering dirt. They sound great, but they are on this path of destruction. They have these dark hearts. They are master liars, and eventually they will be found out, and they will be caught in their own trap. So quite a big section of verses sort of taking us to this one direction that they're going to roll a stone on themselves, they're going to fall into their own pit, and there's going to be trouble. Verse 28, a lying tongue hates those who are crushed by it, and a flattering mouth works ruins. Most times lies are spread because of hate. Now, we see this definitely in the world. What does love rejoice in? Truth, right? So that's really what we want to talk about. That's what we want to spread. Lying tongue hates, but love rejoices in truth. So, any other thoughts before we wrap this up this morning on any of the verses I read, any of the things that were said? Any more thoughts from Proverbs 26?
Just that one about God.
Yeah.
Sometimes somebody will hear something and then they tell somebody and then they tell somebody else. Well, you know how that kind of gets all kinds of mean. It's an awful thing.
And it's a tactic of the devil. The world does that. They present, put it all over the news. It's all over the papers, all over TV and YouTube. And then later on, they find out that's not true. They never spend as much time in retraction, right?
Oh, I know, yeah.
Yeah.
And people want to hear it.
They want to hear.
That's the devil too.
Right.
They want to hear the dirtiest gossip they can get.
Right. They want the dirty laundry.
Yeah.
They don't want the
Isn't there a
the other
song?
stuff.
Yeah, that's what he's thinking about.
Yeah. The song. Yeah. Yeah. I hadn't heard that song in a long time, and then I recently heard it, and I thought, oh man, that's true. Yeah. That sells. But we we want to tell the truth. So anything else? We got 1 minute left.
You were talking about fools and drunkards. When we lived on the lake, our neighbors had a party that lasted all night, and we were on a big bluff. It was probably 40 foot to the lake or whatever, and these men were falling down, and one of them spent the night in his truck, and he broke his leg, and he didn't even know till the next day. I mean, that's like the fool you're talking about. Then a couple of years later, he fell out of deer blind and died. So it's just like that verse 10 or whatever.
Right. Yep. They just do some really dumb stuff. So let's close in prayer, and we'll get ready for our 11 o'clock service. Father God, we're thankful for the wisdom in your word, the book of Proverbs. I ask that all of us, even though we consider ourselves followers of Christ, that we wouldn't get wrapped up in foolishness, that we would continuously review these wise sayings so that we can do right and follow Jesus. And that's whose name we pray.